It is my real pleasure to welcome today my good friend, Dr. Bjorn Ottesen from Norway. He is presently teaching at Belgrade Theological Seminary, and he is one of the experienced leaders from Scandinavia. He worked in several Scandinavian countries, and I think that it is hardly possible to find somebody better equipped to discuss about Christianity in the Norwegian countries. Everybody knows that we live in some strange times. Some people believe that Europe is a post-Christian continent, and that Christianity has said what it has had to say, and it has lost all its relevance. So it would be extremely important to see how somebody who dedicated all his life to God, to service to humanity and to other people, how he sees the present state of Christian church in Scandinavian countries. I welcome you, Bjorn, and go on.
Thank you very much, Radiša, or Dr. Antić, rather. You are my friend. Yeah, to reflect on some of the things that are happening in Scandinavia. Currently, I live in Denmark. And shall I just introduce a little bit about Christianity in Denmark?
Yes.
Because, of course, Denmark is a Lutheran country, Christian country by name. And but over the last at least 70 years, I mean, all the time after the Second World War, there have for some been a political agenda to move Christianity out of the public space. And I think that is one of the reasons why today there is very little religion education in school. There is hardly anything in the public arena when we have political or other public arrangements. There is very little about religion in media. And people today know very little about religion and God in Denmark. And this is also true for the other Scandinavian countries. And I saw some statistics that said that when you look at the more traditional Christian beliefs, for example, that there is a creator, that the Bible is inspired by the Holy Spirit, that Jesus was the Son of God, that he rose from the dead, that he will be coming again. I think, well, there is about between 1.5% and 2% of the population that believe in these things. But having said that, there are many people who believe there is some kind of God. Maybe about 45% say they believe there is a God. And many people want to say they are spiritual, even if they don't want to say they are religious. And maybe this is something they say also in this country. They say, I am spiritual, but I'm not religious. And by that is because people want to have good values. They want to feel that they are responsible people, good people, people who take care of others and take care of their relationships. But they do not want to be put in a box as saying, this is your dogmatics. People are very slow to enter into a context where they say, I have to accept a certain dogmatics around my understanding of reality. Seen from a Christian church point of view, these are quite difficult times. You can say that. Yeah. I don't know if you will ask into some more specific
yes,
things.
Of course.
Yes.
As far as you are concerned, is Christianity going to disappear totally from Scandinavia. Friedrich Nietzsche have prophesied in the 19th century that Christian churches will become sepulchres. So they all will be closed. And this is what some other people also believed. So what is going to happen to Christianity in Scandinavia?
I don't think it will disappear. First of all, still 80% of the people of Denmark are members of the Lutheran Church. And of course, this is often only in name, but still people want to keep the church for one reason or another. And this is, of course, slightly different from if you go to the capital, Copenhagen, or if you go into the countryside in the western part in Jutland, where I live. People are quite different, but it's interesting to see in the very local community where I live, people say, oh, we want to keep the church. We want to keep the church. And this is an interesting paradigm, because very few believe in the more detailed doctrines of the church, but they want to keep the church as if some kind of spiritual, fundamental, more basis in their lives. But there are also other things happening. Almost everybody will, or sociologists will say, obviously, Denmark is a Christian country because we have the Christian values, and people want those values. They want those values about caring for your neighbor, treating others as you want to be treated yourself, the fundamental idea of love that comes from Jesus Christ. These things are things that people want to have in their lives. And there is, if I may extend my question, my answer, there is a trend in Europe where the very youngest generations are looking at things differently than before. First of all, the spiritual surge is stronger among younger people than it used to be. That's one thing. But another thing is, and if I may be a little bit complicated, if we go way back, I am a Seventh-day Adventist, and when our church started back in the 1800s, we were coming out of the Enlightenment, and there is this huge optimism about our ability to explain things. And we had a great hope for humankind that we had all the facts, we could solve most problems, and things would be better and better. And all that collapsed in the First and Second World War. And after the Second World War, we have this period of post-modernism that goes from about, some will say from 1950 and up to year 2000, where we were very skeptical to what can we know at all, and what can we actually explain. And even if there is some truth, we as human beings, we only know part of it. But this thinking is now collapsing. And the sociologists today say that the youngest generations, they say, we cannot live by saying we don't know anything. At least we have to put our cards, or you say, we have to put our eggs into some basket. And we are moving back to people making decisions for taking a stand for something that they say it is worth living for. But we are not going back to the very certainty of what we call the modern time before postmodernism, but we are going into a place where people say, I commit to this idea, I commit to this lifestyle, and I commit to this worldview, even if I know, and this is what is different, even if I know I might be wrong.
And now comes extremely important question. So you are by your origin and your genes the true Norwegian. You are the Viking, but you believe in God. So in that sense, you are a little bit different than maybe the majority of the people. So why do you believe in God still?
Well, it's a good question. Well, there are many parts that there is a creator of life. That doesn't mean that I deny totally the theory of evolution. I think we can observe that species are changing and they are adapting, but I do not think evolution can explain the presence of life. I don't know how much time we have, but I had a very interesting experience with that, flying from an airport in Denmark to London and end up in a seat next to a biology professor at Cambridge University. And he was a research professor. So he was very high up in that field. You don't become a research professor at Cambridge for nothing. So we were chatting together when we were sitting next to each other, and he asked me what I did, and I was teaching at a college in England at the time, and back and forth. And I told him about my faith and about leadership and about the sorts of things I teach. And I asked him, you know, I am a layperson in biology. Can you explain to me, you know, isn't it true that even the simplest form of life, a one-cell being, one cell and one living cell, is extremely complicated? I'm not just a layperson, but I know, you know, it can pick up, it can feed itself, it can throw away waste, it can divide itself and procreate in that sense. And I said, you know, how do you think that happened? How did the first life come into being? And do you know what his answer was? He said, we don't have a clue. We don't have a clue. And but I'm not trying to ridicule science. I'm just saying, I believe there is a first cause for life, and that's the creator. So that's one thing. Another thing is, I believe the story about Jesus in the Bible is true. I'll begin there. Jesus is real. I believe there is good evidence for it, and therefore I am a Christian. And more, I believe there are things happening that we cannot explain that comes through prayer and comes through miracles. And then do you have time that I can share one miracle?
Yes, go on.
You know, this happened to our family a few years back. And our youngest daughter, we have 4 daughters. Our youngest daughter, she has suffered from depression from her teenage years into early 20s. And she has been on, what's the word in English, you know, on tablets for that, medication.
Yes.
And a couple of times in her life, she has been traveling and lost her luggage. And we have seen that when she's been without her medicine for 2 or 3 days, she just dives into a black hole in her depression. But then this happened to her when she moved back from Spain to Copenhagen, and she was starting to study to be a nurse. And she went to a small group with some Christians from early in that process, only having met a couple of times. There was a lady who came up to my daughter and she said, you know, sometimes I have, when I found that I need to say things to people. So she said to my daughter, I don't know what it is, but I have the impression that you are taking some pills and you should stop taking them. And they prayed about it in the group. So our daughter, she called us in the evening, late in the evening, and a psychiatric nurse, and she knows what's going on when people just drop their medicines. But she said, okay, if you want to try, and let's see what happens. But if you feel very ill, you must start your medication again. But that was a miracle or impression, or call it what you like, this lady had. And what happened afterwards was a miracle, because my daughter dropped her medication and 4 years ago. And things like that happen that I cannot explain. But somebody prayed and somebody asked God for help and somebody had a message and something happened that was very unlikely, well, actually impossible. So that I think there is also other arguments, and maybe I shouldn't go into all the details, but I think the argument of beauty is for me an argument. Why are things so beautiful? Why are they not just functional? Why is my wife beautiful? Why are the flowers beautiful? Why? Yeah. Why? Why aren't they just functional? If it's all evolution. And then, of course, I have a personal experience where I have from my young days and also later in life, experiences where I feel God's calling and God's nearness in my life, and I respond to it, and it makes sense.
Why Jesus is so special in your life?
Well, I think if I and you and everybody else followed the teachings of Jesus, this world would be a different place altogether. And with a message from God, calling us into another existence, another way of thinking about our lives, that brings peace and harmony and joy to all. And he challenges the value systems of this world, and he challenges, how so many things operate in the world through greed and power and fighting for your rights and all that kind of thing. So, at least for me, it has made a lot of sense to follow Jesus. I think it's difficult things. Sometimes it has been difficult for me to make choices that I think is in obedience to Christ, but I think it has been for the good of others. For example, my wife and I had a time in our marriage that wasn't going very well. And I'm not saying that everybody has the same solution, but we managed to get through it through prayer and through patience and through but a lot of pain. But then now I can look back and I can see I still have my wife. We have a whole life together. We have 4 children and we are on good terms with all of them. We have 4 grandchildren and we are all kind of, not everything is happiness all the time, but we, that is a blessing. And I think in that case, to follow Jesus' advice and help and prayer, and then I think that is a meaningful thing that comes from following Jesus.
That's you have a wonderful family, Bjorn. Yes, wonderful family.
I do. I am happy about that.
Okay, let's come back to maybe another topic, and this is at the moment the world is going through a extremely difficult period. There is a war. There are several wars going on, but this war between Russia and Ukraine is something that is on the minds of most of the people of this planet.
Yes.
So people are dying, and probably for the first time since the Second World War, politicians are mentioning the possibility of using atomic bombs again.
Yes. Yeah.
So, where this world is moving to, how this world will end, how would you encourage somebody in these times of great distress?
Well, yeah, well, I am not a prophet, so I don't know how it will end. Of course, it's extremely sad, and it's so sad that we have political leaders who are fighting for more power and more authority and more space. You know, Hitler had Lebensraum, life room. You know, so he wanted to expand the Reich. And now we have, I don't know, I don't think Russia thinks of this as an expansion, because the Soviet Union have been smaller and they want to move out again. But I'm not blaming everything on Russia. But I think very much colored by Western information. And I think we all have to say that we are, to some extent, victim of the news media where we live.
Yeah.
So for him to enter into an independent country and demand control and demand that they should be a certain way because that is the right thing for Russia, that is wrong. But I'm not saying, you know, the Western countries are not better, and we have the US. I mean, we are in Serbia, as we talked about earlier. You know, the US bombed Serbia back in the 90s, and they have also very aggressive wars in Iraq. You know, and it's all about oil. So I mean, we have different people on different sides, but the crimes are similar. But this is showing the worst of human nature, and of course you wonder if our faith that there is actually evil powers in the world is not being displayed at this moment in this war. Having said that, I get the news from Denmark, even if I'm here in Serbia right now, and I'm so encouraged by what civilians are doing. There are actually so much good in people. We have private people in Denmark driving their cars down to the border between Ukraine and Poland and picking up families and driving them back to their own homes in Denmark. We have people who own buses, who drive their bus down there on their own private expense and pick up busloads of Ukrainian people, refugees. There's so much goodwill. And of course, if you heard one of the spokespersons for the United Nations says that they have never seen such generosity in giving as they have seen now in Europe, with people pouring resources into Ukraine to help them. So that's wonderful. And that makes you in some way hopeful. But the people who are right in the middle of the war zones, oh, I pray for them and I feel for them, because there are many deaths and it's a terrible situation. I pray that nobody is so far out of their senses that they will use atomic weapons.
Yeah.
That would be, you don't understand, that would be, I don't know if it would be the end, but it would be a terrible disaster. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what I should say
and
more about that. Yeah.
You know, in the Bible, of course, the key central protagonist of the Bible is Jesus. And if we look at the New Testament, the New Testament is basically eschatological. And there are so many promises of Jesus on many pages of the New Testament that he is going to come again. So it seems that the human history has a meaningful end. You have talked earlier about the meaningful beginning of human history, and it seems that there is a meaningful end. For 2,000 years, people have been expecting Jesus to come again. Why he hasn't come?
Ooh, yes, that's a difficult. You know, Jesus had a long sermon about the end of the times and his coming, and you can read it in Matthew 24 and 25. And he mentions all these sufferings that are happening through history. He mentions war and rumors of war. He mentions hunger. He mentions earthquakes and all sorts of disasters. But he seems to say it's not yet, because he says this is only the beginning of the labors, the birth labors. So in a way, he says there are, all the way through history, we have suffering. And why didn't Jesus come in the Second World War, which was such a terrible thing? Why didn't he come in the First World War? Why didn't he come through the pest, when we had where a third of the people of Europe died? So you say, I don't think the church is right if it says Jesus will come when things are at their worst. I think Jesus will come when he decides to, and I think he acts out of a different motive than that, because often maybe through history, Christians have said to how bad it is. I think it's related to when God chooses to conclude, and he will bring the history of the world to a beautiful end. And we see his promise of the creation of a new world, and I make all things new. But I'm not sure it is related to pain. Maybe God has some other plan with that, because if it was according to pain, we should have happened a long time ago. I don't know if that's an explanation. But we of course, it is strange that we have been waiting for 2,000 years, and some people give up waiting, and they say there must be another explanation to the words of Jesus. Maybe it's just a symbolic explanation, or maybe we are looking for just a better time on the earth than we have now. But I believe that this is a literal promise. And that there will be a miraculous intervention in the history of the world, but it will happen at a time of God's choice. And in the meantime, we have to try to take care of each other and this planet.
One more, the last question.
Yes. Okay.
Imagine.
Yes, please.
A girl is standing at the funeral of her father, and she is looking at that dead body, and in a few minutes' time they will drop it into the ditch there. What difference would Christianity make for that girl? For example, Albert Camus, for example, his main hero in his novel L'étranger, he is rather absent. He's standing there. His mother had died, but he's absent. After the funeral, he goes to watch the comic movie. Or, for example, Seneca, the great Roman writer and novelist, he is adopting some kind of Gnostic solution that we should replace those thoughts of sadness and loss and with some other brighter thoughts. And Jesus, when he was confronted with a dead man, he cried. What is there any relevance of Christianity for that moment when that girl is standing and watching the funeral of her father?
Yeah. Well, I was in a hospital last Wednesday, 8 days ago, and the whole family was. He had 3 daughters and a wife, and they were there, and a son-in-law was there, and we were standing around him. They were all believers, and they gave me, because I was there as a pastor, so they gave me the Father's Bible, and they asked me to read particular passages, and I had also prepared something myself. And when I turned to a passage in 1 Thessalonians, the 4th chapter, I saw that he had underlined it in his own Bible in red. So I read it from his Bible, and it said, you know, Paul writes and says, I want you to be not to be ignorant about the dead. And I say this so that you will not have sorrow like all others. And this was so real in this room. You know, there was sadness, of course, there was sadness. And there was a lot of loss. But on the other hand, they all said, it is not goodbye, it is see you again. And they had this hope. And this hope comes from the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and therefore we believe that he can raise us from the dead. And they were saying, you know, talking about all the good things in his life and the fact that they would see him again. And that was a huge comfort. I have also been to funerals with people who have not believed anything. And it's like, it's the end. It's nothing more. And then you understand why Paul said to the Thessalonians, I don't want to have sorrow like others do who do not have the faith. It means so much. It means so much that you believe there is a God, there is the power of resurrection, there is a hope for the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bjorn Ottesen.
Thank you.
May God bless you in your ministry.
Thank you to Dr. Antić, and thank you for inviting me to your program.
It was real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.